What's up, everybody? Chris Pennell here. We're going to my running back tier rankings for week 11 of the fantasy football season. If you enjoy, make sure you like down below. Subscribe to the channel if you're brand new. Let's dive right into it. And really quick, I do want to mention we do have 4 teams on bye this week that do have a decent impact at the running back position. We're going to be without the Saints, the Falcons, the Colts, and the Patriots. So all running backs that are startable week in, week out, and a couple of heavy hitters like Jonathan Taylor, Bijan Robinson, and Alvin Kamara. So actually kind of a dirty week for running back bye weeks, but still plenty of great options. So let's get into the S tier here. There's only going to be 2, and we have number 1 reserved for the man, Christian McCaffrey. Every single week, don't care about the matchup, and it's brutal this week. But like I said, his talent, his opportunity is unmatched by anybody else. He's in a great offense, and they have a high implied team total at 26, 10.5 point favorites. They're playing at home, 17 carries per game, right around 5 targets, 19% target share, close to 5 yards per carry this season. Unfortunately, the touchdown streak did end last week, but hey, who's to say we can't start another one here? Now, the matchup, like I said, it sucks versus the Buccaneers. They're ranking second, allowing the second fewest points per game in the position at only 16, 70 rushing yards, 0 rushing touchdowns on the season, although I'd be willing to bet that probably changes after this week. But also 5 catches and 30 yards through the air. But don't get it twisted, bad matchup or not, CMC is always going to be up there. Austin Ekeler also make the S tier. And a lot for what I said with CMC can apply to Austin Ekeler, as they're pretty similar running backs as far as their skill set is concerned. Now, I do prefer CMC a lot more on the ground compared to Ekeler, and he gets a little bit more volume. Ekeler sitting at 15.5 carries per game, only 3.6 yards per carry, but he's also heavily involved through the air, which gives him that super high floor and high ceiling every single week. Over 5 targets per game, 16% target share, and over 40 receiving yards on a 22% weighted opportunity share. And the matchup's a lot better, as the Packers are currently 26 versus running backs. And moving down to the A tier, we have 3 guys in the list. And honestly, the first one's borderline S tier, but we're going to keep him in A just because I don't think he has quite the ceiling/floor combination as these guys have on a weekly basis. But Travis Etienne of the Jacksonville Jaguars, he has one of the safest roles of any running back in the entire league. Nearly 18 carries per game, 0.8 rushing touchdowns. Hasn't exactly been hyper efficient, only 3.9 yards per carry, but also seeing 4 targets on an 11.5% target share. And while I don't love the matchup versus the Titans, it's not brutal like it used to be in the past. They're kind of middle of the road versus running backs, allowing nearly 90 rushing yards per game and 19.2 fantasy points to running backs specifically. And he's going to receive pretty much every single touch in the backfield in this offense, so he is firmly a top 5 running back this week. And the next guy, I apologize. I loved him last week, but I'm willing to go right back to the well here. No hard feelings on Tony Pollard. But if he cannot get it done versus the Carolina Panthers, I'm not sure when he's going to do it. So this is pretty much the last straw for Tony Pollard, so let's hope for the best. But once again, a perfect spot as the Carolina Panthers are getting shredded versus running backs. They're allowing the second most points per game at 30.4, 120 rushing yards, and nearly 1.5 rushing touchdowns. Pollard's seeing typically right around 20 total opportunities every single week, roughly 15 carries and 4 targets on 11.5% target share. And the Cowboys have a 26-point implied team total, which is one of the highest of the week, 10.5 point favorites. So once again, perfect spot. But if he fails here, I think we just have to be done with him because I'm not sure when else he's going to do it. Then we have Jahmyr Gibbs also cracking our top 5. And I know David Montgomery is back, but Jahmyr Gibbs definitely looked like the alpha in that offense. And David Montgomery, I hate being this guy because if you take away every good player's best play, then obviously no one's going to be a good player. But if Montgomery doesn't rip off that 75-yard touchdown before the half ended, I mean, we're talking about Gibbs completely outproducing him. Now, they're both still going to have a role. David Montgomery is not going away. He's done well with his opportunities, but Jahmyr Gibbs is clearly the better back. He's electric, and he can make massive plays. And they have a 28-quarter implied team total. They're 10-point favorites versus this Bears defense, who actually has been pretty stingy versus running backs. You wouldn't know it by looking at the fantasy points allowed per game at 23.4 because it's currently 20th. But they're only allowing 59 rushing yards per game, which is one of the best in the entire league. I believe that's only behind the Philadelphia Eagles, who were first, allowing the fewest points per game. But they're also allowing 61 receiving yards on 6 catches and half a receiving touchdown, which we know is perfect for Jahmyr Gibbs. We saw Austin Ekeler, who was somewhat of a similar back to Jahmyr Gibbs in terms of them both being excellent pass catchers, had a field day versus that Bears defense. So while David Montgomery is back, and it was his first game from injury, so it could sway more towards that 50-50 split we have seen with him getting the goal line carries. That was not the case last week, with Jahmyr Gibbs seeing 58% of the snaps compared to David Montgomery at 38%. It's not like it was a poor game script either, because that game was close, with the Lions actually having a large lead at the beginning of the game. Moving on to the B tier, and I'm going to be honest, B tier through like C tier, almost all the same plays, so we're really splitting hairs, but I tried my best for y'all to give some guys an advantage over the other. But we're going to kick it off with Breece Hall of the New York Jets. Wasn't a great game versus the Las Vegas Raiders. I definitely expected more because it was a great matchup. They've been horrible versus the run this year, but another good spot versus Buffalo. And the Jets did beat the Bills at home earlier in the season, although Things have obviously changed since then, but it's still Zach Wilson under center. Aaron Rodgers still being down, although it sounds like he's going to be with the team full time, I guess, around Thanksgiving. Doesn't mean he's going to return on Thanksgiving, but sounds like he's going to give it a go at some point by the end of the season. But the Bills also dropped a really poor game versus the Denver Broncos recently, and they've been very, very iffy since that London game versus the Jacksonville Jaguars. But they're currently ranking 24th versus running backs. We just saw Javonte Williams have a pretty big game versus them. Those are allowing 6 catches and 50 receiving yards, specifically 2 running backs, and Breece Hall is the main guy here. Dalvin Cook is complete dust. Michael Carter will get some dump offs here and there, but Breece Hall is the workhorse back in this offense, and it's a good matchup. So, the talent's there, so I'll take it. Nearly 5 yards per carry this season. Javonte Williams has got a ton of volume recently. The overall season numbers don't look amazing. Only 13 carries per game and 3 targets, so averaging around 16, 17 opportunities, which is still good. But if you look at the past 3 weeks specifically, which is probably more important, 53% of the snaps week 7 versus Green Bay, had 19 opportunities with 4 of those being targets. Week 8 versus Kansas City, over 60% of the snaps, 30 total opportunities, 3 of those being targets. And then week 10 versus Buffalo on Monday Night Football, 25 opportunities with 4 of those being targets, and that's 52% of the snaps. So this is a backfield that will use 3 backs with Pirine, McLaughlin, and Williams. The clear-cut lead back in this offense, and we know he's talented. Did have that injury, but it looks like he's returning to form. And it's not the greatest matchup in the world, but I can't pass up a guy that's been getting 20 plus opportunities the previous 3 weeks, and a decent chunk of that being involvement in the passing game. The next 2 here are a bit confusing because I don't know exactly if Devon Achane is going to be back this week, but I'm just going to put them together in case he is back, because if he is, both these guys are going to have plenty of fantasy value this week in a dream matchup versus the Las Vegas Raiders. This game currently features the highest over in the week at 47.5, although the majority of that is coming from the Miami Dolphins with their 29.5 implied team total, which is the highest of the week. They're 11.5 point favorites. They're playing at home, and the Las Vegas Raiders run defense has not been too pretty this season. They're currently ranking 25th, allowing over 110 rushing yards, nearly a rushing touchdown, and 35 receiving yards. And we know both of these backs can be electric, and also yards per carry wise, they're both elite. Raheem Mostert at 5.6 on the season, which is incredible, but that's completely overshadowed by Devon Achane being at 12.10. Now, is this efficient? No, he is not going to continue getting 5 carries and 300 yards and 4 touchdowns every single week. That's just not possible. The best numbers all time are guys like Raheem Mostert at 5.6, Jamal Charles are in that 5 mark, Nick Chubb. It's just not possible for Devon Achane to be 3 times better than those guys all time. So it's going to come down at some point. But we know he's electric. It's a great spot. He's good through the air as well. So I think both guys would definitely have fantasy value. Although with this being Achane's first game back, I would have slight concern there. If he happens to be out and it's just the Raheem Mostert show, honestly, you can put him in the A tier for me. Then to round out our B tier group, we have David Montgomery of the Detroit Lions. I don't like that we saw the snaps down last week and he was losing goal line carries, which is a big concern because that was the main value part of David Montgomery, is that he's going to get the goal line carries in this offense. He's going to get those 1-yard plunges. But on the season, close to 5 yards per carry, which was really boosted up by that 75-yard touchdown last week. But 18 carries per game, 83 rushing yards, not involved in the passing game, so the floor is a bit lower, especially if you are in a PPR scoring league. But as a 28.25 implied team total team with a 10-point favorite at home versus his old team, he should get the opportunity around the goal line, you would think at least. And if he's going to play nearly half the snaps, that's enough value for me. Moving on to our C tier, it's really not that exciting of a group. We do have a couple guys with some upside, but honestly, it's just guys that's going to receive volume, and that's really the most important thing for fantasy football. Aaron Jones, though, he can be very up or down, but we have seen 12 targets the previous 2 weeks. And this is a pretty good matchup versus the Chargers, who are currently ranking 28th versus running backs, 26.2 points allowed per game, nearly 7 catches and 51 receiving yards, which is good for a guy like Aaron Jones. So this is a pretty solid matchup for him overall. The work on the ground can be a bit sporadic, but if he can get us 15 plus opportunities with a decent chunk of that being in the passing game, that's certainly fantasy viable in PPR scoring league, especially playing at home. Kenneth Walker up next, though. He's been getting out-snapped by Zach Charbonnet, so that's definitely concerning. We did rip off that nice 65, 70-yard touchdown last week through the air. Now, that's not something you'd expect going forward, and it wasn't the greatest day on the ground once again. But he should get goal line opportunities. This game does feature a 46-point over-under, 23.5-point implied team total for the Seattle Seahawks. They're 1-point favorites here. Rams are 10th versus running backs, but I'm not overly concerned, allowing nearly 90 rushing yards per game. I just don't love the snaps that we've seen for Kenneth Walker, because Charbonnet has definitely established himself as a pretty much 1A, 1B situation in that offense. And then speaking of boring plays, we have Joe Mixon of the Cincinnati Bengals, and he is not efficient. He's not going to make any splash plays, but he has a solidified role in this offense as the main back who's going to see the bulk of the work. He's going to get a couple of targets, 9.5% target share in the season, and averaging 15 carries per game. The matchup versus Baltimore, not so great. They're currently ranking 12th versus running backs. But like I said, if you're going to get volume, and this is an offense that can put up points, they're going to be fantasy relevant. They moved DeAndre Swift of the Philadelphia Eagles. Now, this is an offense that can certainly put up points. And he has a role in the offense in the pass game, which is nice. 12% target share, getting 15 carries per game, a little bit more efficient, 4.5 yards per carry. Matchup not so great versus the Chiefs, currently allowing the 11th fewest points per game to the running back position, but I'm fine with it just because if you're in a good offense, you're the starting running back that receives the bulk of the work, and you have passing game involvement, that makes you viable. The only issue is when you get around the goal line, that's kind of the Jalen Hurts area, so he doesn't have the best touchdown upside in the world. Let's try not to get too picky at this point. And speaking of volume kings, we have Josh Jacobs of the Las Vegas Raiders. He'll see all the work he can handle, but it's not going to be efficient. 3.3 yards per carry in the season, but 18.6 carries, over 4 targets, 14.5% target share. And honestly, I feel like just the last 4 guys we have talked about, all the matchups are right in a row. It's been 10th, 12th, 11th, and this one versus the Miami Dolphins puts them right at 13th, allowing 89 rushing yards per game, over half a rushing touchdown, but not much through the air. I just hate the game script. 11.5 point dogs on the road, so they're going to be throwing the ball quite often. That could lead to several Josh Jacobs checkdowns, but I'm not excited about it. Then we have Saquon Barkley, another guy that should see a ton of work, but the offense sucks. They're going to be trailing 9.5 point dogs, a 13.5 implied team total. So the touchdown equity is at an all-time low, although to be fair, it was even lower last week when they had an 11 point implied team total. So this is at least a little bit better. And we know Washington defense is not very good, as they are 15th versus running backs, but he's seeing 20 carries per game and 18.5% target share. So if he can just fall into the end zone, he'll take it, but he's going to have to make a living off of dump-offs more than likely. And then we have Derrick Henry of the Tennessee Titans. And back in the day, if we had Henry versus the Jaguars, he'd probably be in that S tier. But not really the case so far this season. They come in as 6 point dogs on the road, 6.5 point dogs actually, 17 point implied team total, which is pretty low. And Henry's having a pretty inefficient season. Well below 5 yards per carry, 4.2 in the season, 16.5 carries, which is nice. But 70 rushing yards, half a rushing touchdown, and really not too much involvement in the passing game whatsoever. Does have a 7.5% target share. But the matchup versus Jaguars is pretty decent, more so middle of the road, a little bit below average. 17th versus running backs, only allowing 63 rushing yards though. But where their weak point is 7.5 catches per game and 52 receiving yards to running backs. So maybe this is more of a Spears week. I like Spears better than Derrick Henry at this point of their career. I'm not saying Henry is complete trash at this point. He could certainly waltz into the end zone. But if he does not score this week, you're probably going to be stuck right around 7-9 points. Which, I mean, it's not what you drafted, but I guess that wouldn't kill you. Then we have Rachaad White of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And speaking of guys that need to live off of checkdowns, we talked about that with like Josh Jacobs and Saquon Barkley this week. Well, Rachaad White's kind of in that same category. They're 10.5 point dogs, 15.5 implied team total. Not a great matchup versus the 49ers. They're currently ranking 9th versus running backs, only allowing 62 rushing yards per game. But where White makes his living is through the air. He's been a check down king recently. Nearly 4 catches per game, 13% target share, over 4 targets, 36 receiving yards, which is almost more than his rushing yards per game, despite seeing 15 carries. He's at 47 rushing yards and only 3.3 yards per carry on the season, but he's the main back in this offense, and if he's going to get checkdowns in your PPR scoring league, well, that can definitely make things work. Isaiah Pacheco, normally I have him a lot higher, because if you're the RB1 for the Kansas City Chiefs, a team that can put up a ton of points every single week, you're going to have a ton of value. But he's firmly in the RB2 range for me this week, because this matchup versus the Eagles is brutal. They are only allowing 14.1 points per game to the position, which is the fewest, 52 rushing yards, which is also the fewest, 0.2 rushing touchdowns, and right around 5 catches and 29 receiving yards. And we have seen Pacheco's involvement in the passing game increase recently, which is nice. And we're going to see 15 plus touches out of him. And they are favorites at home. But this matchup is absolutely brutal. So I do have my expectations a little bit lower than normal. Then James Conner returned last week. He saw the bulk of the work. And if he's going to get his 15 plus opportunities, it's a good matchup versus the Texans. They're currently ranking 19th versus running backs. Well, you're going to have value. And moving down to our D tier, we have Devin Singletary of the Houston Texans. I'm not sure at this moment. It's only Tuesday morning if Dameon Pierce is going to be back or not. If he happens to be out, I think Singletary deserves to be right here. Played 80% of the snaps last week versus Cincinnati Bengals. 30 carries, 150 yards. Also had 2 targets for 11 yards. But I love the volume I saw on the ground, and it's a pretty good spot here versus the Arizona Cardinals. We know they have been pretty awful defensively all around. So far this season, they're currently allowing the 3rd most points in the running back position at 28.4, 110 rushing yards, and a rushing touchdown per game. So Singletary sees a similar role, and they have a 26 point implied team total at home, 4.5 point favorites. It'd be hard to not like him as a streaming option this week, whether it be in your last spot in the flex or if you're in a really deep league, might end up being your RB2, as I'm in an 18-team league. And honestly, I could see a lot of people having him as their RB1 in my kind of league. Brian Robinson had 6 targets last week, a long receiving touchdown. I believe it went for 52 yards. Don't really expect that of Robinson going forward. We're only seeing 2.5 targets per game on the season, 6% target share, but it was nice to see. But this is a great spot versus the Giants. Pretty poor run defense here. 23 point implied team total. They're 9.5 point favorites at home. On the season, they currently rank 21st versus running backs, laying over 110 rushing yards and 1 rushing touchdown per game. So I think Brian Robinson's in line for another decent week. I wouldn't expect a 50-yard receiving touchdown, but I guess that's in the cards the way Sam Howell has been playing, but please don't expect that. Jerome Ford, the lead back in Cleveland, although it's a bit of a split, so I'm going to put him and Kareem Hunt, honestly, just in the same category here because Kareem Hunt will get some goal line carries. Jerome Ford, I would say he's the preferred option, but you never know who's just going to fall into the end zone. I'm fine with either. If you're looking at Pittsburgh's numbers versus running backs this year, currently ranking 21st versus the position. They have James Cook of the Buffalo Bills. We'll have to monitor to see if Leonard Fournette gets activated. He was not playing on Monday Night Football, and we did see a case of the Butterfingers for James Cook last night. So the one fumble, that was on Josh Allen, although some people probably thought it was on James Cook. I mean, the handoff was just dropped, and you can't blame James Cook for that. The first one he fumbled, and then at the end of the game, when he had that long, I forget how long it was, like almost 60 yards, he dropped the ball, but it dribbled right back up to him, so he got extremely lucky there. So we'll see if that's going to affect his touches going forward. And if Leonard Fournette is active, that can obviously hurt. I mean, Latavius Murray is there. But good matchup versus the Jets. They're very tough versus the pass, but they're pretty bad versus the run. 23rd versus running backs, allowing 100 rushing yards per game. Also a decent chunk through the air as well. And I would say James Cook is definitely the best running back in that offense. But we saw, if you make a mistake, they don't mind benching him for a little bit. Then Alexander Mattison, if he is good to go and healthy, he has to clear concussion protocol. But if he plays, great matchup versus the Broncos, who are currently allowing the most points per game in the running back position, allowed nearly 200 yards total to Latavius Murray and James Cook last night. So that's a situation to monitor. If he happens to be out, Ty Chandler would be an excellent streaming option this week. And then the unfortunate F tier, but some of these guys, how bad the running back position is outside of a few, you're probably going to end up having to start them, especially if you're in a deeper league or you're dealing with bye weeks this week, which are taking out a couple of solid running backs. We have the Steelers duo here of Najee Harris and Jaylen Warren. Both are viable options, although Najee has not looked bad recently, putting up some pretty decent fantasy performances. Now, I would have him higher in the right matchup, but unfortunately they draw the Browns this week, who are only allowing the 6th fewest points per game in the position at 73 rushing yards and less than half a rushing touchdown, so not a ton of upside this week in my opinion. We also have Chuba Hubbard of the Carolina Panthers, and at this point we're just scraping the bottom of the barrel. But if you're a starting running back on an offense, I mean, you're just going to at least have to make this list somehow. Although Miles Sanders' snaps did increase a little bit last week, and this is a terrible game script as a 10.5-point dog versus Dallas. But again, like I said, scraping the bottom of the barrel. Gus Edwards also a viable option, but we cannot expect those 3 touchdown games every single week. And we saw it last week versus the Browns where he busted, only 11 carries, 24 yards. If he does not get into the end zone, he is not going to be a viable option. So very touchdown dependent because they just don't really involve him in the passing game. And we did hear news that Keaton Mitchell will have a larger role next week, so that'll hurt Gus Edwards' value even more. Spears, he's also going to make this list. I know he's the backup running back for Derrick Henry, but he does play a decent chunk of the snaps, and he has involvement in the passing game, which is perfect in this matchup versus Jacksonville, who has given up a decent amount of points through the air to fantasy running backs this season. Currently has a 13% target share and earning 4 targets per game nearly. We have Darrell Henderson of the Los Angeles Rams to end this video, as Kyren Williams will not be ready to come back this week, although I believe week 12 is expected to return, although I have to refresh my memory on that a little bit. But this game has a 46-point over-under, only a 1-point spread, so it should be decently high scoring. And it's a good matchup versus the Seahawks, so they're currently allowing the 5th most points per game to the running back position at 26.2, 83 yards and a rushing touchdown per game on 45 receiving yards. We've seen it pretty much be a split between Darrell Henderson and Royce Freeman, but I prefer Henderson slightly. With that being said, that's all I got for today's video, so I hope you enjoyed. If you did, make sure you leave a like down below. Subscribe to the channel if you're brand new. Wish you all the best of luck this week on your waivers, and I'll see you all next time.